Affairs editor Sebastian Usher told me more.
This is the BBC. For details of our complete range of programmes, go to bbcworldservice.com/podcasts.
Welcome to the latest global news, compiled in the early hours of Sunday, the 10th of December. I'm Alex Ritson with a selection of highlights from across BBC World Service News today. Coming up.
أيها العراقيون الشرفاء إن أرضكم قد تحررت بالكامل.
The war against the Islamic State group is officially over. Britain's Foreign Secretary has used a visit to Iran to plead for the freedom of a British Iranian woman accused of trying to overthrow the Tehran government. In Honduras, the opposition are demanding fresh presidential elections. Also in the podcast, France says goodbye to the rock and roll legend Johnny Hallyday, and the sleep-deprived mice helping scientists search for a cure for dementia.
Do you sleep badly because you've got these disorders, or maybe the interesting hypothesis is that the poor sleep triggers or exacerbates the neurological condition.
But first,
نعلن لأبناء شعبنا ولكل العالم أن الأبطال الغيارى وصلوا لآخر معاد.
We declare to our people and to the whole world that the heroes have reached the last strongholds and that the national flag now flies high above all Iraq to its furthest borders. That was the announcement by the Iraqi Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi that the war against Islamic State in Iraq is over. After years of conflict which saw vast areas of the country overrun by Islamist forces, a recent series of victories for the government has pushed IS fighters from their former strongholds. But after 4 years of conflict, is the battle against IS really over, as Haider al-Abadi has declared? Our Arab Affairs editor Sebastian Usher told me more.
He said that the Iraqi flag is now flying over the whole of the country, that the last holdouts of ISIS have been retaken. He congratulated the forces, all the different elements of the forces which have been involved in this bitter, bitter battle, thanked the Iraqis for the blood that they have all shed in order to rid the country of this scourge. And he basically gave a message of unity, saying we need to be all together. And he said we will fight against corruption as the next big battle. So he's looking to the future, talking about reconstruction of cities, rebuilding Iraq. This absolutely has to be done in order to prevent the conditions that led to the growth of ISIS from re-emerging. It's true, but it's an incredibly difficult thing for him to do, not just where he has a power base, but across the whole country.
Haider al-Abadi has said the war is over, even announcing a public holiday and parade. After 4 years of conflict, is this a little risky, a little premature, perhaps?
He has made a lot of statements like this over the past few months as it's become clear that ISIS is essentially on its last legs. He's been to the last town that was held by ISIS to celebrate there. So this is a continuation of that. Tomorrow, as you say, on Sunday, there will be a victory parade. Already there were helicopters flying overhead as he was making this speech. So he wants to, as I say, to unite the country, to give this momentum for a new era he would hope for in Iraq, a sense that this poison has been leached out of the system. But that's a very, very big thing to ask. Also, in practical terms, is it really over? He says that the Iraqi flag flies at every bit of Iraq, but there are parts of the Western Desert where ISIS has fled to. There are reports that there may be at least 3,000 fighters still there on both sides of the border. Has the Iraqi military really completed that task? Also, we're hearing every day of some suicide attacks on a lower level than in the past, but there's still insecurity across the country.
The British government says the Foreign Secretary, Boris Johnson, has held frank discussions in Tehran with his Iranian counterpart about a British Iranian woman imprisoned there. Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe was arrested while visiting relatives in Iran with her young daughter. She's been convicted of trying to overthrow the government, a charge she strongly denies. Her husband, Richard Ratcliffe, told the BBC what he was hoping for from Mr Johnson's visit.
I'm not expecting that on Monday morning he comes back with her on the plane. I'm looking very closely as to who he gets to meet and looking very closely as to what happens tomorrow with her court case. And I've long criticised the Foreign Office for not being as robust in public as I would have liked them to be, and you know, that's a battle we've had behind closed doors as well. And Yeah, if he's able to, through his charm and his presence, bring her home, then through charm and his presence, great. But yeah, she should be with her family for Christmas, and please, can that be arranged?
I asked Siavash Ardavan of BBC Persian what he thought would happen to Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, who's due in court again on Sunday.
We don't know, but it's very telling, the timing of this trial, given that it's coming one day after Boris Johnson is visiting Iran. It may be a show of force by the judiciary, which is completely separate from the government and the government officials who are talking to Boris Johnson, just to show that they won't be taking orders from anyone.
So Boris Johnson has been pleading for Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe's release. Has he got anywhere?
So far, we don't know. The key is if he gets to meet the head of the judiciary, because the judiciary is the party that's handling Nazanin's case. I don't think that will happen, but nevertheless, it also depends on the other issues they're talking about, bilateral issues, especially economic, financial issues. And if the Iranians feel happy that they're making headways in that direction, it is said that they'll be more comfortable showing leniency.
What are relations between Britain and Iran like?
It's better than it used to be, especially after the nuclear deal was struck between Iran and world powers, including Britain. There are now a lot of investments being made by Europeans, including the British, inside Iran. Boris Johnson has gone with a big delegation. They have signed contracts, including a contract to build the 5th biggest solar farm in Iran and another contract to build a cancer research center. So that's good. Iranians are trying to urge the government of Britain to make it easier for British banks to deal with Iran, because many of them have not been trying to get too much involved in the Iranian banking system because they're fearful of U.S. reprisals. So the Iranians are hoping that they could sort of nudge the British government into making more investments and showing to the world that Iran is open to business. That's at least what the government is trying to do.
Siavash Ardavan of BBC Persian. To Honduras now, where 2 weeks after a disputed poll which triggered street violence, the opposition are demanding a new presidential election. The electoral authorities, they allege, tampered with the original poll's results in favour of the incumbent, Juan Orlando Hernandez, who's been declared the winner by a narrow margin. The main opposition contender, Salvador Nasrallah, said the world was watching.
No es una reclamación sencilla la que estamos haciendo.
We are not making a simple demand, and I am sure we do not have here in the Electoral Court the capacity to be able to realise this. But the whole world has already received it, and therefore I do not believe the whole world will allow Honduras to be robbed of the people's will.
I asked our America's editor, Leonardo Rocha, whether there had been any reaction from Juan Orlando Hernandez.
Well, what the government supporters are saying is that the opposition are refusing simply to accept defeat. They asked for a recount of nearly 5,000 ballot boxes, and that's been done at the moment. The results will be known probably by Monday, and they should accept the result. The difference between them is about 50,000 votes, so it's very unlikely that there will be a change in that. It is really a situation that is very difficult to solve now because both sides, they have declared themselves winners and they are not willing to give in at that moment.
So what will happen now?
Well, we have until the 26th of December for the Electoral Court to declare an official winner. The OAS, the Organization of American States, said that if they feel that there is fraud or the irregularities, they will call for a new election. But Honduras is a very poor country, is a Central American nation with a big gang problem, and it has one of the highest murder rates in the world. So it is a situation that no one wants in the region, because you have to remember that many of the immigrants, now migrants, going to the United States are coming from Honduras or escaping the gang violence in Honduras, El Salvador, and Nicaragua. So it's a problem that will spread.
So what's the feeling on the streets?
Well, it's very polarized, the country. You have the president, who is law enforcement center-right, and you have a liberal left-wing approach, and the country is split like so many countries in the world are now.
Our America's editor, Leonardo Rocha. British scientists are conducting experiments on mice to see if there's a link between sleep deprivation and dementia in humans. The researchers at Imperial College London are keeping the mice awake and then studying the effect of sleeplessness on their brains. The Newsroom's reporter Richard Hamilton went to the research laboratory to find out more.
So now we're going into the place where the mice live. And here we have our collection of mice, which are all living a nice, quiet mouse life.
So how many mice have you got here?
200.
Yeah, between 200 and 300 in this room at the moment.
And they're all in little boxes, and it smells a bit like a pet shop here.
It does, yes.
These are our pets.
They're not for sale, these mice.
Professors Bill Wisden and Nick Franks took me inside their laboratory, where they keep mice in boxes.
So the way we do sleep deprivation on mice is just to put a giant piece of Lego or other novel object in their bed chamber, as it were, and a bit like us, they say, oh, that's an interesting thing. I have to investigate that.
They then place objects such as pieces of Lego or marbles inside the boxes to try to keep the mice awake for 5 hours.
So it keeps looking at it.
Because unlike us,
The mice are so interested in the objects that they forget to sleep. It's the equivalent of giving a child a toy or an adult a box set of DVDs. Bill Wisden believes that one of the purposes of sleep may be to cleanse the brain, and therefore sleep deprivation could impair that ability.
we don't know why we sleep, but there's quite a lot of speculation that sleep's involved in a fundamental physiological process like clearing toxins from the brain. And that's one of the things we're investigating, that during the course of a lifetime, toxins might not be adequately cleared from the brain, and they might lead to deposits of proteins called amyloid, which are toxic for neurons. We're testing the idea that the purpose of sleep is to clear these toxins. And we're actually looking at the effects of sleep deprivation on mice, whether that affects their ability to clear toxins during a particular type of sleep called non-REM sleep, which is the sleep we enter first after being deprived of sleep.
It might seem slightly cruel to keep mice awake, but doing so could answer the fundamental question, why do we sleep? It's a 5-year programme by the Dementia Research Institute to study possible links between insomnia and the onset of diseases like Alzheimer's. Nick Franks says if there is a causal connection between the two, this could have huge ramifications for how we might prevent dementia.
Many neurological disorders present with poor sleep, but what we don't know is whether it's causal. What comes first? Do you sleep badly because you've got these disorders? Or maybe the interesting hypothesis is that the poor sleep triggers or exacerbates the neurological condition. And if that's true, there may be ways of treating the condition by treating the symptom of poor sleep.
Professor Franks adds, though, that this causal connection between lack of sleep and dementia is not yet proven. So when we lie awake at night, we should not let fears of getting dementia add to our worries, at least not yet.
Richard Hamilton. You're listening to Global News, the most important stories and the best interviews and on-the-spot reporting from the BBC World Service. Every weekend, you can hear a review of the week's main news stories and why they matter. That's in The World This Week, and the programme is also available to download from our website, www.bbc.co.uk/programmes. Senior officials close to the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas say he won't meet the US Vice President Mike Pence because of America's decision to recognise Jerusalem as Israel's capital. The Palestinian Foreign Minister said the shift in policy meant the US could no longer broker peace in the Middle East. There have been further clashes between Palestinian protesters and Israel's security forces, as our correspondent Tom Bateman reports.
Israeli troops fired tear gas as Palestinian protesters burned tyres and threw stones. It marked a third day of clashes in the occupied West Bank. Israel said its air force bombed 4 sites in the Gaza Strip, run by the militant group Hamas, after rockets were fired towards Israel last night. One landed in the southern Israeli town of Sderot, causing minor damage. In Gaza, the bodies of 2 people were found in the rubble of one of the Israeli airstrikes. The clashes in Jerusalem and the occupied West Bank since President Trump's statement have so far not matched the scale of those seen earlier this year during a separate crisis. But tension remains high. While many Israelis continue to praise Mr. Trump's decision, diplomatic relations between the Palestinian leadership and the White House are under severe strain. Riyad al-Maliki, the Palestinian foreign minister, said that a meeting planned later this month between the American Vice President Mike Pence and the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas would not go ahead. He called for a new international mediator to replace the US in its historic role as peace broker between Israelis and Palestinians.
Tom Bateman. As we've seen, tensions in the region have increased sharply since President Trump's decision. But such is the sensitivity of Jerusalem's status that it's triggered protests across the Muslim world. Lebanon, for example, is home to almost 500,000 exiled Palestinian refugees. And as our Beirut correspondent Martin Patience now reports, most hope to return home one day.
What happens in Jerusalem makes waves across borders. Here in Beirut, thousands turned out to protest against Donald Trump's decision. The demonstrators were the children or grandchildren of Palestinians who fled or were forced to flee their homes nearly 70 years ago. Almost all have never been to Jerusalem and probably never will. But it's testament to the emotional pull of the city through the generations. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians now live in run-down camps like Shatila. It's a maze of narrow alleyways, tightly packed homes and tangled power lines. Over 30 years ago, it was the scene of a massacre when Israeli troops allowed a Christian militia to enter the camp and slaughter hundreds of people. For Miriam Mahmoud, the suffering of Palestinians strengthens their longing for Jerusalem, and she rejects any Israeli sovereignty.
It will be rejected and will forever be rejected. It's a provocative move that will lead to the end of Israel. Jerusalem means everything to us. It's our history, it's culture, it's our memories, it's our home.
Palestinians are treated as second-class citizens in Lebanon. And despite being here for decades, most like Alaa-ad-Din do not consider it home.
Even if I don't go, I taught my children to love Jerusalem and Palestine. So even if I don't live long enough to go back to Jerusalem, my desire is for them to continue the journey back home.
Every corner you turn here, you'll see reminders of Jerusalem, posters of the city's iconic Golden Dome, and graffiti calling for resistance and struggle. For Palestinians here, Jerusalem is not just a city, it's key to their identity.
Martin Patience with that report. France has been saying farewell to one of its cultural icons, the singer Johnny Hallyday, with central Paris packed for an emotional ceremony. There were cheers and applause from tens of thousands of fans as his cortege was accompanied down the Champs-Élysées by hundreds of bikers. Delivering a tribute, President Emmanuel Macron said the singer had formed part of France itself, and many mourners felt as if they'd lost a member of their own family. Our Paris correspondent Hugh Schofield was watching the ceremony. I put it to him that Johnny Halliday's great gift was to appeal to all generations.
Indeed, and today was a really remarkable national moment. Johnny Hallyday is not really appreciated outside the French-speaking world, but inside France he was a monument, an icon. All the cliches keep coming out, but it's true. People did love him, and not just his music, but the man as well. He represented something for people. And at today's ceremony, and certainly outside in the street, you saw tens and tens of thousands of people. Many of them were the older people who grew up with him, for whom, of course, he represented their youth, their optimistic days of the 60s and so on. But there were others from other generations too, as I heard from the people who were there.
I feel sad. I really feel sad. I loved Johnny, and my mum loved him. She was 20 when she went to the Olympia. They just threw away all the chairs at the end of the show. And she has listened to him all her life, and so I listened to him, and I love these songs, like from my generation's songs.
It's an icon, French icon, and for every French people, I think this is the right thing to do, to come here. And I'm not especially a fan of him, but I discovered him, and he's a big star. We're all together, French people are together to say goodbye to Johnny Hallyday, that's all.
OK, so Hugh, he's not being buried in the famous Paris cultural cemetery Père Lachaise. Why is that?
Well, I mean, he could have chosen to have gone there, of course, the Père Lachaise or to Montparnasse, or one of the other big Paris cemeteries. He's chosen to be buried in, or his family has chosen to bury him in his home in St. Bart's, the island of St. Bart's in the Caribbean, which is where he had a property. He lived part of the time there, partly in Los Angeles and partly in France. It's a personal matter for the family. Some people are disappointed among his fans because they'd have liked a place to gather around. But what we can certainly say is that they, had he been buried in France, it would have been immediately a place of pilgrimage, so maybe it's just as, and probably, quickly got out of control, so maybe it's just as well his tomb is going to be so far away.
What will his legacy be?
Thousands of songs, for one thing, and the memory of a person who encapsulated an era, a man who brought America to France, never was particularly loved in America or Britain, though he loved America, and who therefore, for the French, represented a generation and who accompanied that generation from the 50s up to the present day. They loved him, but he was never appreciated outside his home, but inside his home he was loved.
Hugh Schofield in Paris. The government of Myanmar has appointed an advisory panel with foreign and Burmese experts to implement a peace proposal for the country's conflict-ridden Rakhine state. The new panel includes the veteran US politician Bill Richardson and a former Thai Deputy Prime Minister. More from our Asia-Pacific analyst Celia Hatton.
The panel has been asked to implement the recommendations of a commission headed by the former UN Secretary-General Kofi Annan. His report, filed in August, warned Myanmar's Rohingya Muslims were vulnerable to human rights abuses because they were, in effect, stateless. Mr. Annan called on the government to extend citizenship to the Rohingya. One day after the Commission's report was released, Rohingya militants attacked Burmese guard posts, igniting a violent military operation against Rohingya civilians the UN has called a textbook example of ethnic cleansing. More than 600,000 Rohingyas have fled Myanmar since August, citing systematic rape, torture, and murder. The Burmese authorities have refused the UN's request to send in human rights monitors, preferring instead to form their own panel to address what they call the challenges in Rakhine State.
For decades, Taiwan concentrated on developing its high-tech and manufacturing industries. That helped drive an exodus from the countryside and led to a drop in the number of farmers. But now the island is seeing a reversal in this trend, with many more people, including high-tech office workers, giving up city jobs and choosing to take up farming. And they're doing so with the government's blessing. This report from Taoyuan City, near Taipei, from our correspondent Cindy Su.
So from this leaf, you can tell that there are bugs eating these strawberry plants. Yeah. And you come out in the middle of the night to catch the bugs. Yeah. That must take a lot of time.
It's okay. Good. It's fun. Yeah.
That's Wayne Chan, who used to work in the semiconductor industry, but wasn't happy.
When I turned 30, I thought, is this what I really want to do? It wasn't. So shouldn't I find something I really enjoy doing? So I chose farming because I like nature and I like to step on the earth. Choosing to go into farming allows me to work in nature, and that makes me very happy.
Watering his tomato vines, Wayne looks nothing like the microchip engineer he once was, with his city clothes replaced by a long plastic apron and rubber boots. But his decision to change is bearing fruit of the financial kind. Despite a lack of experience, he invested $300,000 to rent half a hectare of land. His organic fruit and vegetable farm now makes a profit. Taiwan's government desperately needs more people like Wayne. In the 1980s, the island produced enough to cover more than half its food needs. Now it's 30%, lower than Japan and South Korea. This field is being used for growing rice, but an increasing amount of Taiwan's farmland is no longer used for farming. That's because Taiwan's farmers are aging, and there aren't enough people entering this profession. This farmer I talked to is 66. Her son works in the city and so can't help her. The farmer in the distance, he's in his 80s, she says. Young people don't want to be farmers because it's too exhausting. But rolling their sleeves up and digging over the soil here are people from a whole variety of professions, attending a government-subsidized farming course. Sally Chen was a nursery school teacher for 10 years. She and her husband have already started their farm.
My husband and I are farmers' grandchildren, but we didn't farm. We were encouraged to open a business or work in office jobs and only helped out on the farm on holidays. But we really liked it. Now we've invested $100,000 in our farm and we're growing organic green vegetables, carrots, radishes and tomatoes.
The teacher, Liu Guangchuan, says highly qualified workers want to leave the pressures of office life behind, and they are becoming more aware of food safety. But they have to be realistic.
You're usually very happy to come here to learn, but because they don't have a farming background, they soon realise it's really hard work to be a farmer, and it takes time before they can make money.